All right. Well, welcome everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful day, staying happy and healthy. I'm Tim from Fontenelle Forest, back with another Understanding Nature. And today we're going to talk about raptors. Raptors are the predators of the sky. And the word raptor actually means, well, it comes from the word rapier, R-A-P-E-R-E, which means to seize or capture. And that's how most, not all, there's one exception, but our birds of prey, our raptors, they're carnivores and they eat mammals and insects and reptiles and other birds. And that's how they get their prey for the most part. They'll seize it, they'll capture it. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that. Now there's two types of raptors when we talk about raptors. We have our falconiforms, which are diurnal. Diurnal means they're out during the day. So we have eagles, osprey, vulture, hawks, and falcons. And then we have our, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, strigiforms. And these are our nocturnal raptors. So our owls. Our owls are our only nocturnal raptors. Now, a lot of birds eat meat. Crows will scavenge. A lot of birds eat insects, so that makes them at least omnivores. They'll eat some meat. But what makes our raptors different from other birds that eat meat? So raptors have three distinct distinguishing features that kind of set them apart. So the first is a hooked beak. So you can see in these pictures, we got a hawk, an eagle, and a falcon here, and they have this hooked beak with very sharp edges. And they use that beak on their prey. So they'll bite the skull or the spine or the neck of their prey. This very pointy, sharp tip will pierce their prey, can pierce that skull. So it helps to dispatch their prey. And those sharp edges help tear that meat into pieces so that they can eat. Because birds don't have teeth like you or I. They can't chew up their food into small pieces. So our raptors will just tear it into chunks and then swallow the chunks whole. Now, another distinguishing feature of our raptors is their feet. They have these feet with curved claws called talons. Generally, they'll have three forward, so three talons pointing forward, and then one in the back. And that back toe is called a hallux. It's generally longer than the front-facing toes. And so when a raptor catches its prey, it'll push that hallux through, and that helps kill the prey. It also helps it get a good grip on it, so that way it can fly up, usually someplace in a tree or someplace higher where it's safer from predators. Because if it's eating on the ground, then it's vulnerable to something like a fox or a coyote or something that would then in turn kill and eat it. Now, the third distinguishing feature of our raptors is their eyes. So all of our raptors have really good eyesight. Their eyes are about 1.5 times larger than other birds of the same weight. And their eyes are tube-shaped, so almost like having telescopes for eyes. They have tube-shaped eyes rather than being round or spherical. And that produces a larger retinal image, just like a telescope does. So they also have a larger number of receptors per square millimeter than other animals or than humans, which lets them distinguish individual objects at a much larger distance. So raptors have about twice as many receptors as humans. We have about 38,000 receptors per square millimeter in our eyes. An eagle or a hawk or a kestrel is going to have about 65,000. So that's a significantly larger number of receptors. So let's talk about some of our raptors. Now this one's probably familiar. We all know this guy. This is the bald eagle, right? So the bald eagle is a species of sea eagle. And this is America. This is the symbol of America since 1782. Now, fun fact, Ben Franklin was not a fan of the bald eagle. Ben Franklin wrote to his daughter, he is of bad moral character and does not come by his living honestly. And I'm going to show you in a second why Ben thought that. He also called the eagle cowardly because he didn't like the fact that eagles would let other smaller birds drive them away. And that's actually common with a lot of raptors. It's called mobbing. So especially during the day when these raptors are roosting in the trees, smaller birds, oftentimes, sometimes songbirds like robins or starlings or blackbirds, but generally it's oftentimes jays, blue jays, and crows will do what's called mobbing. So they'll gather in the trees. One of these birds will spot the raptor sitting in the tree, and then they'll start to call out, make a lot of noise, and sometimes they'll even dive at them. So a lot of times you'll see a hawk or an eagle flying, and there'll be a smaller bird that's just kind of pestering him. So that's called mobbing. All these birds will then gather in the trees. And actually, if you listen in the forest or in the woods, you can oftentimes discover where there's a raptor hiding. I'm actually not using a virtual background today. I'm using a real background, which is my backyard. And I have a juvenile hawk that likes to sit out here in these trees. And I know when it's around because the blue jays start going nuts, and I can usually wander out there and kind of discover where he's perched. But back to the bald eagle, sorry, got kind of on a sidetrack there. So Ben Franklin didn't like them, but to the Native Americans, they were considered sacred, and they've been a spiritual symbol for the Native Americans for a very long time. Now, at one point, bald eagles were an endangered species in this country. DDT, the use of DDT, the pesticide, was causing their eggshells to be soft and their numbers decrease, but they've really flourished under protection, and we're seeing them more and more. Now, bald eagles are not bald, obviously, and actually the nickname or the name bald eagle doesn't come, sometimes I used to think that it's because that white head makes them look bald, but that's not it. So bald eagles are called bald because it comes from the word, a very old word, piebald, and piebald means white-headed. Now the difference between a male and a female eagle is one of size. So they both have the same colors, the same white head, the same white tail, but the female is about 25% larger. Now over here on the right, this is an immature bald eagle. So this is a juvenile, and they don't get that white head and white tail feathers until they reach sexual maturity. So until they're about 5 years old, it takes them about 5 years before they reach sexual maturity, and they'll grow in those white feathers and look like this one on the left. Now, eagles are usually found near water, and that's because a majority of their diet is fish. About 56% of their diet is fish, followed by small birds. Small birds make up about 28%, and then mammals about 14%. So they're much more likely to hunt other birds and fish than they are mammals. But a lot of times they steal other birds' catches, and this is why Ben Franklin said they did not come by their living honestly. So they'll steal fish from even human fisher people. But this is a short video clip.
Got it. He's making his getaway. Oh! You gotta be kidding me.
Yeah! So what you saw there at the first bird coming in was an osprey, and the osprey dove down and caught a fish and started to fly off with it. And then the eagle came in and swooped down at the osprey, which forced him to drop that fish, and the eagle turned around and picked it back up. So pretty sneaky, and that's why Ben said he was a bad moral character, and he didn't come by his living honestly. Now, bald eagles like old growth trees for perching and nesting, preferably near water, and their nest is this mass of large sticks, and they like trees that are 66 feet tall or taller. That's their preference. So the largest nest ever recorded, because they'll come back to these nests year after year, and they'll add to them and they'll reuse them. The largest nest ever recorded was one in Florida. It was 10 feet wide and 20 feet deep. So that's a big nest. Now, eagles will mate for life. but if one of the eagles dies or if they have repeated failed nesting attempts, they may then go out and search for another mate. And eagles can live 20 years or more. The oldest recorded bald eagle was 38 years old at the time of its death. Now, a lot of times in movies, you see an eagle flying and you hear this. Very majestic sounding, right? That is the majestic call of the red-tailed hawk. And movie makers put that in movies because it sounds better than real eagle calls. Real eagles sound more like this. So it's not quite as majestic. So movie makers didn't like those sounds, so they substituted that cry of the red-tailed hawk because it sounds much more wild and majestic. Now, bald eagles are partially migratory, so they need open water, or they prefer open water so that they can catch fish. So they'll migrate as far as they need to find open water. So what that means is for Nebraska, for Omaha area, sometimes we'll see eagles year round. If the water stays open, if we have a mild winter, this past winter wasn't bad, and we saw eagles year round flying near the river. Now, if the river were to freeze over completely, then those eagles would fly south until they could find some open water and have some place to hunt. And we had a big gathering, I forget when it was, February, maybe February-ish. There was a big gathering up near Crescent of eagles, and some of our raptor recovery folks went up and they got some of the eagles that were sick. One of the major causes of mortality for eagles nowadays is lead poisoning. So when you use either lead weights when you're fishing, and then the eagle catches the fish that we let go, or that it gets off the hook, but it gets that lead weight in it, the eagle consumes that lead, and it doesn't take very much lead to make an eagle sick. So that's a lot of times what our raptor recovery folks are treating eagles for, is that lead poisoning. Well, let's talk osprey. We saw an osprey in that video catching a fish. These are sometimes called sea hawks, river hawks, or fish hawks. And that's because unlike the eagle, whose diet is 56% fish, the osprey's diet is 99% fish. They're actually pretty unique in that respect, that they eat almost exclusively fish. And they're one of the most widespread raptors on the planet. They're found in every on every continent except Australia and Antarctica. And when it catches its prey, it always lines it up head first, just like you see in this picture. And there's a very good reason for that. And it's aerodynamics. If you're carrying that fish sideways, it creates a big surface for the wind to hit, makes it harder to fly. So they line their prey up head first, and that makes it more aerodynamic. Now, they also, like the eagle, will migrate south for open water, and they can migrate quite a ways. They don't just migrate to find open water. They will fly all the way to South America, and they do it pretty quickly. So in 2008, they fitted an osprey with a radio transmitter, and they tracked it. It flew in 13 days from Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, 2,700 miles south to French Guiana in South America. Now, osprey feet, even in the raptor world, have some adaptations to help them out because they're catching fish. Fish are slippery. So they have a couple of adaptations. One, this outer toe is reversible. So instead of having that raptorial arrangement with 3 forward and 1 back, they can do that, and they use it that way. But when they catch a fish, they'll swing that outer toe around and put it in back, so they can have 2 talons then on each side of the fish. Now, this pad of their foot also has some barbed pads. So it has almost like one of those grippy things you use to open a jar. It has these barbed pads, and that helps it keep a grip on that slippery fish. And they're excellent fishers. So on average, an osprey spends about 12 minutes fishing before it makes a catch. And it's successful on average, it catches a fish about 1 in every 4 attempts. So I wish I could catch a fish 1 in every 4 casts and only wait about 12 minutes between catch and fish. That would make fishing, you know, a lot more interesting, a lot more fun. Sometimes you cast all day and you don't get anything. Now when hunting, so they'll dive down, and their wings are adapted to this lifestyle too. They have very long wings. So their wings are longer than a hawk's, and that gives them maximum lift to get up from the water. So if they catch a fish, and sometimes they'll catch a fish that matches them in weight. The fish is the same weight as the bird, and a strong trout. I've heard stories or read about weak or hungry osprey that were pulled to the bottom and drowned because they grabbed a fish that was so big they couldn't then get the lift they needed out of the water. But most of the time, these wings will give them the lift they need, and they'll get out of the water with that fish and they'll fly off and eat it somewhere. Now, I told you not all raptors, you know, seize and capture their prey. Certainly this is one that doesn't. This is the turkey vulture. So you might see these soaring. They like open areas. They like open ground, semi-open country. They don't like dense woods for obvious reasons. That makes it hard for them. But they're a scavenger. So they'll soar up on the thermal currents, and they'll look down. They have very good eyesight, so they'll look down to see what other scavengers are doing on the ground. And also, they have the largest olfactory system, so sense of smell, of any other bird. So they can smell when something dies and it starts to decay. It lets off a gas, and that's what makes dead things, you know, when you're out and you smell something and you know something's died, that smell is that gas. Well, vultures can detect the beginnings of that decay from about a mile away. So they're very good at smelling. Now their feet, because they don't have to seize and capture their prey's not going anywhere. Their feet are kind of flat, relatively weak, and their talons are relatively blunt because they don't have to use those the way other raptors do. Now, unlike other raptors, vultures don't have the vocal organs that other birds do. So they make only a series of grunts and low hisses. But they do roost in trees. So sometimes you'll see them gathered in groups like this. So they roost in trees in large groups. During nesting season, they'll nest in caves or hollow trees. But they really only do that. They really only nest during nesting season, and they'll raise 2 chicks a year. Now they'll roost in these groups, but they actually go out and forage independently. So usually you'll only see one if there's a small kill. Sometimes you see a big group soaring around together, or you'll see a whole bunch of them on maybe a deer that's been hit by a car. So they go out to forage independently, but I suspect they all smell the same carcass, and so they end up in the same place anyways. So sometimes in the morning, you'll see them standing like this spread wing stance. So at night, when they sleep, their body temperature drops about 5 degrees, goes down to about 93. So they become just a little bit hypothermic. So a lot of times in the morning, you'll see them in this spread wing stance. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. That's a tree frog that's on my house making that noise. So sometimes in the morning, you'll see them in this spread wing stance. And part of that is to absorb the sun, so they warm up. It dries their feathers out. You'll see this a lot of times after a damp night. And also, they think it helps bake off bacteria, so it helps keep them clean. I actually saw this once. I was driving on the interstate near Chicago, and there was a dump nearby, and there were hundreds of vultures sitting in the trees. And they were all facing the same way, and they all were in that same stance. And at first, I thought they were fake. I thought they were like those fake plastic owls that you put out to scare other birds away, keep them from roosting. But they were just all roosted there together, and that had been a damp night, and so they were all in that spread wing stance, soaking up that morning sun. So let's talk about hawks. Again, just to review, that is the cry of the red-tailed hawk. Now, Nebraska is home to about 17 species of hawk, and I'm not gonna go through each one. I'm just gonna cover some of the most common. The red-tailed hawk is the most common, and they prey primarily on small mammals and some birds. And they're frequently used in falconry. So falconry, when you train the bird to hunt, so they're very amenable to that type of training. I was just watching a program recently about the historic buildings in England, and it was interesting that one of the buildings, they were having trouble with the pigeons. The pigeons roosted on the roof, and the pigeon feces was causing that rock to decay and to crumble. So they would go up. They had a guy whose main job it was to go up with his hawk and fly his hawk around just to keep the pigeons away. So I thought that was interesting. So Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks are our smallest hawks. Now, they both prey primarily on songbirds, which not everybody likes. We like to put out bird feeders. We like to attract our goldfinches and our chickadees and our nuthatches and things like that. And sometimes when you do that, you will attract either a Cooper's hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk or both, and they will kill and eat some of those songbirds. Now, like I said, people get upset about that. They don't like to see their pretty songbirds getting killed. But I heard it described this way, and I really like this analogy. They said, if a Cooper's hawk comes in and it kills a songbird on my feeder, no doubt about it, that is a bad day for that songbird. But it's a good day for the hawk, because the hawks have to eat too, and they play an important role in the ecosystem. Now, in these pictures, they look very similar, but really the Cooper's hawk is larger. The Cooper's hawk is about the size of a crow, and that's let's see, this is the Cooper's hawk here on the right. The sharp-shinned hawk is smaller. It's about the size of a jay. And if you look at them from underneath, the sharp-shinned hawk, its wings are kind of bent when it flies. If you saw it flying, its shoulders kind of hunch up, and its head barely passes those shoulders, whereas the Cooper's hawk looks more like a T. Its head extends past those shoulders. And they kill by constriction, so they'll actually seize their prey and they'll squeeze it. And so they rely on surprise. So a lot of times you'll see them all of a sudden dive into a bush, going after the birds sense them there or see them there, and they go hide in the bushes. But that hawk will then go just plowing into that bush, and it's kind of dangerous. So they did a study. They studied 300 Cooper's hawk skeletons after they had passed away, and what they found was almost 25% of them, almost a quarter of them, had healed fractures in the bones of the chest. So when they go crashing into that brush, they tend to get hurt. Now this bird here is a goshawk, and I chose this picture because this is one of our raptor recovery folks, and this was a hawk that came in injured, and they were getting ready to release it. But it gives you an idea of the size. So they have relatively short wings and a long tail, and they're found in both deciduous and coniferous forests, and they prey on birds and mammals. So the way they hunt is they hunt in quick flights, low to the ground. So they start up high, they'll drop down, and they'll fly very low over the ground, sometimes swooping up over bushes and things. And they rely on that obstructing cover and surprise. So might spot something on the other side of a row of bushes, they'll dive down, and then they pop up over that brush and surprise their prey. And their flights are short, so their hunting flights rarely last more than about 90 seconds. If they don't catch something, or if their prey spots them, then they'll fly back up and perch and wait again. Now this is an American kestrel. So this is actually a species of falcon, the smallest and most common falcon in North America. And they'll eat insects, grasshoppers, lizards, mice, some small birds. They're not very big. They're only about the size of maybe a jay, maybe right around there. And they hunt by perching or by scanning and hovering. So a lot of times when you're out outside the town, and you look over a field and you'll see a bird flapping real fast and just kind of hovering maybe 20 feet off the ground. Generally, that's a kestrel. Here's what they sound like. And their broad diet, that broad diet of insects and lizards and mice and things like that, that's really led to a lot of success for them. They've done quite well. Now they nest in cavities, usually old woodpecker holes. So again, this is an advertisement for leaving some of that standing dead wood. If you have a lot like I do with a lot of trees, I won't clear out standing dead here because the woodpeckers can clear out. Maybe I'll get some kestrels. There's a lot of other birds and animals that use those woodpecker holes. So they'll nest in cavities, rock crevices, nooks and buildings. And usually what happens is the male will go out and identify several possible sites, and then he'll bring the female, his lady love, around, and he'll show them. Here's a nice hole in a tree. Here's a nice rock crevice. Here's a nice nook in this building. And the female then is the one who selects the final nesting site. Now, usually they like to be along wooded edges or in open ground. So the female they'll build a nest, and the female will lay between 3 and 7 eggs. But both sexes, the male actually helps incubate those eggs, which is kind of unusual in the bird world. Now here's another famous falcon, the peregrine. So the peregrine's a little bit bigger than a kestrel. So they're about the size of a crow. And they are one of the most widely distributed raptors. So they're actually more widely distributed than osprey. So they're found on every continent except Antarctica, and in a wide variety of habitats. So forested areas, deserts, marshy areas. So very wide variety of habitats, and anywhere from sea level up to about 12,000 feet. So they do very well. And their diet is almost exclusively medium-sized birds. So like the osprey that feeds almost exclusively on fish, the peregrine feeds almost exclusively on medium-sized birds. So again, just like the kestrel, the male will identify several nesting spots, and they really like cliff sides. They like to find a ledge about a third of the way down a cliff, and then they really don't build a nest. They just kind of scrape out a depression. But the male will identify several possible sites, and then he'll take the female to show her, and she picks out the final nesting sites. Now during the day, he will help incubate the eggs, but at night it's almost exclusively the female who incubates the eggs. Now these are one of the fastest animals in the world. When they dive after their prey, they can reach between 200 and almost 250 miles an hour. Now, going 200 miles an hour, they can't actually seize their prey at that speed. So actually what they do, a lot of times, they'll come in from above, and that white stomach, I almost pointed to my computer with my finger, whoop, didn't mean to do that. That white stomach there, that provides some camouflage. If you were a bird and you were looking up at the sky, that white stomach is going to kind of blend in with the bright sky during the day. So they come in, and if they can, they'll just hit that bird. They'll just crash into it and knock it out, and then it falls to the ground and they can go get it. If they miss, that gray on their back also provides some camouflage when looking down, and they will swoop back up and attack from underneath. Now, peregrine, the word peregrine actually means wanderer. So they actually have one of the longest migrations of any bird. So tundra nesting falcons that nest up here north of the Arctic Circle and up in Alaska, will actually winter way down here in South America. So they can move over 15,000 miles in a single year, because they'll move 7,000 plus miles down to here and then back again. Now, just like our eagle, with the DDT back in the 50s, the use of DDT caused their numbers to decline. Their numbers dropped for the same reasons. Their eggshells would be soft. They had a lot of mortality of the young chicks. So they started breeding them in captivity and then re-releasing them into wild areas. Now, what they found, especially out east, is that a lot of these released falcons would migrate to big cities, and they would flourish. They would nest on the sides of buildings, and they would do quite well feeding on a bird that is very, very common in all big cities, and that's pigeons. So they were just flourishing in these cities. So taking advantage of that, they started breeding these birds and releasing them on the tops of skyscrapers. Now, in 1988, the Nebraska Peregrine Falcon Project released a pair of peregrines on top of the WoodmenLife Tower. Now, at the time, the WoodmenLife Tower was the tallest building in downtown Omaha. So 7 falcons were hatched, 5 of them survived, and none returned the following year. They all went elsewhere. And in 1989, 5 falcons were hatched. 2 of the 5, Woody and Sky King, would return later on to establish nests. So 3 years later, so Woody and Sky King went off for a few years. In 92, Woody came back with a mate, Windy, and together they hatched 3 chicks, Ariel, Zenith, and Skywalker. And these were the first wild hatched chicks in Nebraska in nearly a century, so nearly 100 years. So, and then falcons will develop a family tree. So they mate for life, or in like the eagles, until one of the pair passes away. So they will mate, and then say one of them passes away, the surviving mate will return to that nest with a new mate. So they'll find a new mate and they'll return, and they create this family tree. Now, some of the highlights of our WoodmenLife Tower falcons. Zenith, who hatched in 92, nested in Cleveland, Ohio. And they know this because they banned these birds when they hatch. And then they can identify them, they can see where they go. So Zenith nested in Cleveland, Ohio, and became one of the top producers of chicks until her death in 2002. Sky King, who was one of the ones released in 1989, was at one point sighted in Paracas, Peru in 95. And then Goldie, who hatched in 99, nested in Fargo. Dorley, a male who hatched in 99, and Hope, a female who hatched in 2002, nested in Topeka, Kansas. Now, in 1996, we had 2 new peregrines show up. Zenith, who came over from Rochester, and he brought with him a mate from Winnie from Manitoba, Canada. And they migrated to the WoodmenLife Tower. Zeus got in a territorial battle with an unknown male, but they think this was Sky King. So that was Sky King, who was released in 1989. So Sky King said, fine, I like it here in Nebraska, but I guess it can't be here in Omaha. So he went over and went to Lincoln and nested in Lincoln. Now, between 1996 and 2011, Zeus fathered over 47 chicks with three different females. And the current nesting pair, Mintaka, who's the male, and Chayton, the female, have produced 6 chicks together since 2018. And Mintaka's been using that nesting site with other mates since 2012. Now, one of the other cool things is that there are live stream falcon cameras. So if you want to go see, sometimes you can see the falcons on the nest here in Omaha in the WoodmenLife Tower. There's one in Boston, and there's another at UC Berkeley. So let's see if they're on the nest. Let me go to the Falcon cam here. Now, the other day when I did this, oh, yeah, he's there. So one of the pair is there on the nest. All right, you can see it looking around. So it's pretty cool. I'm glad they were there today. When I checked earlier this morning, nobody was home. And actually, when I was checking this link the other day, nobody was home. But when I first was writing the program, there was somebody sitting on the nest. So if you're interested, it can be a fascinating way to spend some time just to go around and look at these cameras and see what's going on. And they actually have other nesting sites. So you can see here, I'm going to scroll down. This is a different nesting site on a different side of the building. And so sometimes you can catch the falcons there. But there's one of our WoodmenLife Tower falcons, probably either Chayton or Mintaka. So pretty awesome that they made an appearance just for my program. I put in a special request. So the last raptors we're going to talk about are our owls. So owls are our nocturnal raptors, and they hunt mostly small mammals and birds, and they're well camouflaged. You don't often see them during the day because they do a pretty good job of hiding. But they're adapted for nocturnal hunting. They have some pretty cool adaptations that make them very, very good at hunting at night. So the first of those is silent flight. So up here, we see an owl feather. Down here is a hawk feather. So now the edge of this, oops, sorry about that. The edge of this owl feather has these comb-like serrations, and the trailing edge is kind of got, it's kind of rough. It's kind of fringy almost. Whereas you can see that this hawk feather is very sharp. I mean, it's, a sharp edge, very well defined. And what that means is the air, because what makes noise when a bird flies is the turbulence of the air going over the wing. So these comb-like serrations and that rough edge breaks up that turbulence, and it makes it quiet. Now, owl wings are also very broad, so that means they can glide. They can't fly as fast as some of our other raptors, but they can glide quite well. And of course, if you're not flapping, you're not making noise. So they can glide quite well and sneak up on their prey. Now, their eyes are very large relative to their head, just like our other raptors, and they're tube-shaped. But in owls, their eyes can actually be anywhere from 3 to 5% of their body weight. Now, in humans, it's something like 0.0013 or less, if I remember right. So their eyes are tube-shaped, and they're held in place by this, what's called a sclerotic ring. So those tube-shaped eyes makes them very far-sighted, so they can see very good at a distance, but not so good up close. So they have these whisker-like feathers that kind of help them sense things close up. Now, they have two other adaptations in their eyes that help them see very well at night. One is a reflective layer, the tapetum lucidum, if I'm saying that correctly, probably not, and that's that reflective layer behind the retina that reflects light. So, when you see a deer in the headlights and their eyes reflect, or you see other things in a flashlight or headlights, you take a picture of your cat, excuse me, and their eyes reflect that light. That's that same kind of layer in the back of the eye. It reflects light, and it gives more light for the receptors to use. Now, owls have very densely packed cones. So if you remember your biology, eyes have rods and cones. Cones see color and see very well in bright light. Rods see very well in dim light. So they they're very more sensitive to dim light. So an owl's eyes has about 1 million cones per square millimeter. Our eyes have about 200,000 cones per square millimeter. So about 5 times more cones per square millimeter than a human eye. Now their eyes are so large that they can't turn their eyes side to side. They can't, without moving their head, they can't look up and down and side to side. Owl teenagers can't roll their eyes at their parents. So they've developed some other adaptations. So one, they have 14 neck vertebrae. Humans have 7. So we have about 160 degrees that we can turn our heads. An owl can turn its head 270 degrees. Now owls have only about 70 degrees of binocular vision, so where they can see with both eyes. We have about 110. We have about 180 degree field of vision. About 110 of that is binocular vision, but they can turn their heads to make the most use of that 70 degrees. Now, the other adaptation owls have for hunting at night is their hearing. Owls have amazing, incredible hearing. So they can detect, a great horned owl can detect a mouse's heartbeat from 100 yards away under a foot of snow. That's what I've been told. So if somebody can correct me if that's an exaggeration, but I've heard that more than once. Now, part of the reason they have such great hearing is they have offset ears, or many species have offset ears. And their ears are located not on top of their heads. Sometimes you see owls that have those feathery tufts that kind of look like ears. Those are just feathery tufts. Their ears are actually located on the sides of their heads, right behind their eyes, and covered by the feathers of their facial disc. But the part of their brain, the medulla, that's associated with hearing is much more complex than other birds. So an owl can detect the difference in when a sound hits one ear versus when it hits the other ear. And they can detect that difference up to about 30 millionths of a second. And so they can detect, and with the offset ears, then they know if that sound is higher or lower, left or right. And they'll turn their head until that sound is reaching both ears at the same time. And then they'll fly towards the sound, and they can adjust mid-flight. They can adjust their trajectory. When they get close, they'll stick their feet forward in front of their face, and then they close their eyes and strike. So pretty cool stuff. Now, one of my favorite things about owls is owl pellets. So all of our raptors, they eat big chunks of food, and it goes into their gullet, and it gets compressed into a pellet. Now, owls, their stomach juices aren't quite as strong as other birds. So when they cough up these pellets, and these pellets are all the things that can't be digested. So it's fur, hair, bones, teeth, things like that. Now, if you can find these pellets, you can dissect them and you can find out what the owl's been eating. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that sounds disgusting. Some of you at least are probably thinking that, but actually it's really cool. And you can buy these online, and we've done owl pellet programs. I don't know if we have any coming up, but keep an eye out for that. Our raptor recovery folks have been doing owl pellet programs. You can buy owl pellets online, and they've been sterilized. They've been baked at a high temperature. Usually they're from barn owls, and then you can buy them online and dissect them at home. So it's actually really cool. Now, owls like to frequent the same trees. So if you have an owl in your neighborhood, you can look underneath. Sometimes you can find the tree either by listening for those jays and crows in the trees, mobbing that owl during the daytime. And sometimes just the feces underneath kind of gives it away that that's a good perching tree for the owl. Sorry, I swear it's not COVID. It's just from talking a lot. My throat's dry. So you can also buy, there's a book called Owl Puke that I highly recommend. Got a lot of owl facts, and you can get it at Barnes & Noble. And it comes with an owl pellet that you can dissect. Great, great activity for kids. It's a lot of fun. Now I'm going to talk about some of our owls in Nebraska before we close up. So out in the panhandle out west, we have burrowing owls. Burrowing owls are pretty cool. They actually live out, they like that short grass, open ground, and they will take over abandoned prairie dog burrows. And they actually have very long legs for an owl. So they will catch prey by flying, but sometimes they'll actually sprint after their prey on those long legs. Barn owls are an open country owl. And, you know, owls have gotten this kind of mysterious reputation because they're nocturnal. We don't see them much. And sometimes you'll hear this. And that's not the sound you usually associate with an owl. That's not that gentle hoo or hoot. That's if you were walking through the dark and you heard that, that would kind of freak you out a little bit. So barn owls are an open country owl, and they eat a lot of mice and voles. So and they're got this characteristic kind of heart-shaped white facial disc. So they're a good thing to have in your barn because they'll keep it free of rodents. This is a long-eared owl. So this is a forest-dwelling owl. And this is a short-eared owl. So this is an open country owl. The first time I ever heard a short-eared owl, it's kind of like the barn owl. It was early summer and we were living in Wyoming, and I heard a sound that I thought for sure was a baby antelope in distress. So I took my flashlight and I went out to search for this baby antelope that I was going to rescue from whatever trouble it was in. But what I found was short-eared owls. And they're really kind of cool. So they have kind of a wobbly flight, kind of moth-like. And I actually watched a juvenile crash into a tree once, learning to fly. It was unhurt, so it was pretty amusing. Now the barred owl is one of my favorites. We have barred owls kind of all over the place now, and they have a very distinct call. It sounds like, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" So they're one of my favorites. I fell in love with them because we had a pair that nested in a tree just off our deck, and we got to not only hear them all the time, which made my daughter, who at the time was just a baby, just laugh. Every time we heard those owls, she would laugh. But we got to see their hatchlings leave the nest and watch them feed them before they learn to fly, because the hatchlings will leave the nest and then they'll use their talons and beak to climb up a tree, and the parents will continue to feed them wherever they're at. So we got to watch that process, and it was really cool. But barred owls used to be confined to the east where there were woods. They're a forest-dwelling species, but they've actually expanded west. So the Great Plains used to be a barrier to the expansion of the barred owl. But as humans settled and we kind of created some of these windbreaks and forested areas, the barred owl expanded west. And now actually out in Oregon and Washington, it's considered an invasive pest because it's driving out the spotted owl. Now our smallest owl is the eastern screech owl. And they're very small. Probably not much bigger than a blue jay, only about yay big. And they're very well camouflaged. They'll find a hollow tree, a place where a branch is broken off, and they'll sit in that hollow and they'll kind of fill it up, and they blend right in with the tree. So they're really kind of neat. And of course, our largest owl, the great horned owl. And that's a pair. I'm not sure which one's the male and which one's the female, but that's a pair of great horned owls doing what's called duetting. And of course, here at the forest, we really like great horned owls because we've incorporated it into our logo. So this is the great horned owl on the oak leaf. Well, if you'd like to become a member of Fontenelle Forest or make a donation, please feel free to visit our website or to give us a call. If you're interested in booking a program such as this one for your group, kind of a private program, feel free to get a hold of me. This is my contact information here. And we want to thank our sponsors because of COVID, we weren't able to hold our big fundraising event. And these are the companies and the people that have generously continued to give and allowed us to continue to bring programming to you at this time. So I want to say thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the program. Come on out to the forest because we're open now, and we will see you again. Our next virtual program is scheduled for August 28th. Since the forest is open, we're going to go down to once a month. So we will see you on August 28th.